question is not what spiritual path works for me. The question is, am I awake enough to recognize the one I am already on? The only question is whether you are walking it as yourself or as someone else's idea of who you should be. A few days ago, a colleague of mine, a woman who has been on the spiritual path for years, came to me with a question that made me look deep within. She said, "Adriana, I'm starting to wonder what even is a spiritual path, because everything I have tried has eventually become a cage. I followed teachers, I followed traditions, I followed my own longing, and somehow I always end up surrendered to something outside of me, and it doesn't feel right. Something in me tells me the truth is within." I sat with this question for a while, and this video is my answer to her, and most likely to those of you who are pondering on this topic as well. Because what she was talking about is the most ancient pattern in human history. It cuts across every culture, every century, every continent. And once you see it, truly see it, you cannot unsee it. And that unseeing, that is where your actual spiritual life begins. Here is the pattern as simply as I can frame it. Every single being is born carrying what I call the divine fire, your soul, your Atman, your spirit, your Buddha nature. It is what is real, it is yours, and it is enormous, far too vast for the small frightened ego that formed in early childhood to hold comfortably. Because we are ingeniously designed beings, we do what the psyche does with everything too large to contain. We project it outward. We throw it into a face, a figure, a book, a building, a leader, an idol, a god. We look outside ourselves and say, there, that is where the power lives. That is where the answers live. That is where the sacred lives. And in that moment, with the best intentions in the world, we hand over the key to our own kingdom. Carl Jung described this with devastating precision. He wrote that gods and spirits are, psychologically speaking, autonomous complexes, real, living energies within the human psyche that appear as external divine beings precisely because we haven't yet claimed them as our own. I suggest to read the Red Book written by him if you're interested to find out more about thought forms. The divine is not a projection of nothing. It is a projection of everything. Everything that is most real about you shining back at you from the outside, wearing a borrowed face. This is not an insult to God. This is a statement about the size of God and the smallness of the ego that encounters her. The question is never, should we feel the divine? Of course we should. The question is, does the encounter with the divine move us toward union or toward submission? Does your spiritual life make you more yourself? There is a dark side to this in our world, because this projection mechanism, this beautiful, natural, developmental impulse has been understood, mapped, and systematically exploited for as long as power has existed. The pattern is always the same, in every culture, in every age. Step 1, find the projection. Find what people are already worshipping, already surrendering to. A tradition, a fear, a longing, an archetype. Step 2, position yourself as its legitimate vessel. I am the divine. I am the anointed one. I am the guardian of the truth. Step 3, administer the projection. Control the rituals, the language, the access, the meaning. Step 4, the crucial step. Keep the projection out there. Never allow it to return home to the person who generated it. Because the moment it does, they no longer need you. We see this repeat without variation across history and culture. In Japan, the imperial machinery weaponized the ancient Shinto tradition of kami nature, the divine presence within all things, into a single object of worship, the living god emperor. It was only recently that, and forced by circumstances, that the emperor declared himself not a god, descendant. The people's collective divine fire was pulled, aimed, and detonated. Young men died as kamikaze, divine wind, with serenity because they had been convinced the divine lived in the emperor, not in themselves. In China, the Confucian philosopher Mencius formulated it with philosophical clarity. Those who labor with their minds govern others. Those who labor with their strength are governed by others. Whatever his original intention, and it was more nuanced than this, that sentence became the operating logic of every governance structure that followed across the globe. The thinking few administer the meaning. The working many surrender to it. And one of the most effective ways to ensure compliance is not chains, actually, it is worship. It is making the governed believe that their divine fire lives in the governors. In Hinduism, a tradition with extraordinary depth of sovereign wisdom, the Bhakti devotional path, which at its highest is a practice of dissolving into union with God, has also produced rigid temple hierarchies, priest-controlled access to God, caste systems justified by divine ordinance, and devotional communities where the living relationship with the deity slowly fossilizes into a system of social control. The flame of Mirabai, who defied her king and her in-laws to love Krishna, who belonged to no priest and no institution, became in lesser hands another administration. And in Christianity, the tradition built on perhaps the most radical declaration of sovereign divinity in human history, the kingdom of God is within you. The same trajectory unfolded with breathtaking speed. Within a few centuries of Jesus, the living interior fire of early Christian experience had been restructured into a church with exclusive access to salvation, a priesthood that mediated between the human and the divine, and an inquisition that would eventually kill people for claiming a direct, unmediated relationship with God. The very thing Jesus pointed toward, your own inner kingdom, became the thing the institution could not afford to let you find without their permission. The pattern does not stop at the political or the religious. It goes all the way to the abyss. When Einstein's equations were handed to military architects, they built a bomb. The same physics that could have illuminated the nature of reality itself was fed into the machinery of domination and annihilation. Genius in service of the survival ego. Discovery bent toward destruction. And when you look at what emerges in the deepest, most fortified corridors of entrenched power, the networks, the atrocities, the things that have been surfacing into public consciousness in recent years, this year even more so, too monstrous for ordinary comprehension, you are looking at the same ego survival machine at its absolute terminal endpoint. The maximum distance from the divine, the maximum consequence of projection, never reclaimed. What part of human nature takes it this far? I assume Jung would say the collective shadow, the accumulated, centuries deep, unintegrated darkness of entire civilizations operating without accountability. When a group builds a system that requires for its perpetuation that the divine remains permanently externalized in them, their bloodline, their institution, their secret knowledge, then the shadow of that system grows and grows and grows until it operates with what feels like its own intelligence, its own hunger, its own will to consume rather than create. Is it literally non-human? Is it demonic in a cosmological sense? The spiritual traditions of virtually every culture in history have had a name for that, and they all have agreed it is the opposite of the divine. What I can say is this: the gap between the divine within and the ego survival mechanisms does not shrink by itself. Left unattended at civilizational scale, it has a body count. But there is this cruelty operating not in the corridors of power, but in our own homes and our own spiritual communities. Parents who, in their love and their fear, say, I will hold your sovereignty for you. I will think for you, decide for you, protect you from your own fire, because I am terrified of what you might become without my management. Spiritual teachers who, in their own unhealed hunger, say, I carry the teaching. You must surrender to me in order to reach the divine. Your inner knowing is dangerous without my guidance. This is the Messiah complex ping-pong, and it is usually not done with malice. It is done with fear, and the fear that if you reclaim your own divine fire, the structure of the relationship with God might collapse. The fear, which is actually a projection of their own unresolved shadow, that your sovereignty will destroy you. So the cycle perpetuates itself across generations. The worshipper becomes the teacher who creates the worshipper who becomes the teacher, each passing the projection along, each believing sincerely that they are protecting the other, that it is for your good. You cannot heal this in someone else. You can only refuse to participate. And that refusal, grounded, warm, without drama, is the beginning of genuine spiritual courage. What does it look like to live differently, to be a spiritual hero in this modern age? My colleague asked, is there even an example? Because everyone who tried to live sovereignly ended up dead or imprisoned. She's not wrong that the cost has often been high, but there are examples worth knowing about. Not heroes of battle, heroes of the interior. People in whom the spirit burned so consistently and so completely that the projection machinery simply found no purchase. Diogenes walked the streets of ancient Athens in broad daylight, carrying a lit candle. When people asked him what he was doing, he simply said, I'm looking for a human being. In a civilization full of warriors, priests, citizens, philosophers, politicians, he was looking for someone actually present, actually alive, actually sovereign. The candle was not a joke. It was a diagnosis. He was surrounded by people who had given themselves away to roles, to systems and appearances. And he was looking for the fire for their awakened spirit. Spinoza was formally excommunicated from his Jewish community at 23 years old with the harshest curse available at the time for saying openly what he believed about God, that the divine was not a distant legislating authority, but the living substance of all that exists, nature, and that no institution held the exclusive key to it. Later, the Roman Catholic Church banned his works entirely. Yet, they eventually became one of the foundations of the modern free mind. Emily Dickinson, who published almost nothing in her lifetime, maybe like 10 poems, she carried a relationship with God that her friend and editor, Mabel Todd, later described it like this. To Emily, God was not a faraway and dreary power to be formally addressed. He was near, familiar, persuasive, present in the garden, in a winter light, in the flight of a hummingbird. She required no priest, no institution, no permission. And from that intimate, unmediated interior life, she produced nearly 1800 poems that have moved millions of people across centuries, although they were published after she left this 3D world. What these people have in common is not biography. It is not even the courage in the conventional sense. What they share is a fire, an inner fire that was never fully surrendered in the outside. They did not achieve perfect spiritual awakenings. They were human beings with their own contradictions, their own shadows, their own struggles. But they did not hand their sovereignty to an external administrator. And the divine spirit that moved through them, precisely because it was not filtered, not institutionally processed, not safely managed, touched something real in millions of people who came after. They are not examples of perfect humans, nor deities. They are examples of divine spirit, choosing to live as fully as possible in a human life and finding expression regardless of the cost, the rejection, or the silence. And in doing so, each of them contributed something irreducible to human evolution. Not because they were special, but because they did not make themselves unavailable to the fire, to their spirit within. And I want to offer another example, one that might surprise you, but which is for me one of the most alive demonstrations of healthy spiritual orientation, like an example of how to live from spirit, that I have encountered in recent years, in my life at least, to what I've been consuming and been exposed to. Many of you know I love BTS and what they represent. And I love in particular the way Jungkook navigates the extraordinary and unprecedented circumstance of being worshipped by millions of people simultaneously worldwide. He doesn't resist this love, he receives it graciously, warmly, he asks for it, and he gives it back multiplied. And he consistently refuses, cutely but firmly, to become the vessel for people's projections. In his live sessions, he would sing and be funny, cute, tease, and play with ARMY. Yet, he is consistent in often transmitting this message. You see me as an idol, a star. However, I am a person who works very hard to do what they love. And remember, you are the star of your own life. Do you understand what he's doing here? He's refusing to administrate the projection. He is pointing the mirror back. He's saying the thing you feel when you watch me, that aliveness, the inspiration, that sense of what is possible, that belongs to you. I'm just showing you a reflection of your own potential. Use it. This is the opposite of most others that say, keep looking at me. Don't take your eyes off me. This is a young man saying with simplicity and consistency, look back at yourself. Me personally, I have worshipped deities. I have practiced rituals of devotion. I know from personal experience the particular quality of energy that moves through you when you fully open to something you hold as sacred. And I can tell you, the devotion I felt watching Jungkook taught me something important, that the more formal devotional practices sometimes obscured. Namely, that the uplift was always coming from within me. Jungkook was the occasion. I was the one integrating it in my life. The Ishtadevata tradition, the chosen divine form in Hinduism, was always understood as a doorway, not a destination. You walk through it and arrive at yourself. That is what genuine spiritual devotion does. It returns you, expanded, to your own interior, to your own divine nature. Anything that keeps you dependent rather than returning you home is not a spiritual path. It is a spiritual cage with a beautiful door. So when my colleague asked, what is a spiritual path? Well, here is what I want to offer, not as a final word, but as the beginning of a different conversation. I believe your spiritual path is your own life, exactly as it is, not because you have earned it or learned it or been granted it by a priest or a teacher or an institution, but because you would not have a life, any life, in any form, if the Spirit of God had not instilled it in you to begin with. The very fact that you are alive, that you are breathing, you experience this life, you have feelings, that you long for something, this is already supernatural, already sacred. You did not manufacture your own aliveness. It was given, a gift. And the giver of aliveness is, by any name you want to call him, God. This means you arrived here spiritual. You did not become spiritual later. You did not acquire spirituality through practice or initiation. You are spiritual because Spirit of God is the substance of your existence, living itself through a three-dimensional human life, navigating matter, condensation, time, space, loss, joy, grief, beauty, wonder, complexity. However, this does not make the practice, any spiritual practices, irrelevant. The meditations, the rituals, the traditions, the teachers, the teachings, the tools, all the tools, they are necessary. And without the practice, it all stays in your head. Maybe not even there. You might not even become aware of them. And they help you remove the layers of ignorance that cover it gradually. When you begin a spiritual practice, you do begin to feel more spiritual, and that feeling is real. But what is happening is not that you are becoming something you are not. What is happening is that you are noticing, finally, feeling, finally, what was always true about you. The practice is the candle. The light was already in the room. The danger, the same danger we have been tracing through this entire video, is when a tool declares itself the source. When a tradition says, without us, you are spiritually empty, devoid. When a teacher says, you cannot access the divine except through my meditation. When an institution builds an entire architecture of meaning on the premise that your spirituality is a deficit to be filled rather than a fire to be recognized and amplified and encouraged, supported. Because once you believe that, you become manageable. You become the kind of person who will surrender their sovereignty for access to what is already theirs. Your life is your spiritual path. Every difficulty, every relationship, every moment of genuine doubt or genuine joy, every question your colleague brings to you at the end of a long day, all of it is spirit navigating this world, gathering experience, learning itself through the particular unrepeatable lens of your existence. The question is not what spiritual path works for me. The question is, am I awake enough to recognize the one I am already on? The world as it is, from its most ordinary control structures to its most incomprehensible atrocities, is what an unreclaimed spiritual fire produces at scale. People who cannot hold their own light and therefore live in service of whoever holds it for them. The world that is possible, and I believe is coming, is what reclaimed spiritual fire produces. People who are too fully themselves to be administered, too alive to be enslaved, too grounded in their own interior to worship at any other altar but the one within. My colleague asked me what a spiritual path is. I told her, well, it is your own life. You're already on a spiritual path. The only question is whether you are walking it as yourself or as someone else's idea of who you should be. That is the conversation I'm here to have. That is why I'm here to walk beside you.